Welcome to Lawyers in the House with Motley. Wish you had a lawyer in the family? Now you do. Here's your host, Veronica Waters.
Hey, come on into our house and make yourselves right at home. Welcome to Lawyers in the House with Motley. I'm your host, Veronica Waters, and rest assured, you are safe with us. But by the time you hear the end of this show, you might be looking around your house to wonder if you are living with danger. Imagine buying the latest, greatest smartphone of your dreams with all the best technology, and then it turns into a nightmare because it explodes in your pocket. Could that fancy tool in your shed be hiding a design flaw that could cause you to lose a limb? What's in that bottle in your shampoo? Is that safe to put on your head? What about that serum on your lashes? Did you know that your car's airbag could be under recall and send hot shrapnel flying into your face if you're in an accident? I think we should talk about this over some almond milk and cookies. Wait, is your oven still safe to use? Maybe we just need a nap. But didn't I hear something about my CPAP might put me in danger? Product liability is what we're talking about today, folks, in case you have not guessed. And I have two amazing guests in here from the Motley family of attorneys whom you know because you've been rocking with us for a few months now. So we have some repeat guests in studio. We're starting off with Alan Saltzman, who has been practicing nearly 40 years in the field of law, right? And more than 3 decades of that right at Montlick.
About 37 years, I think, yes.
Yeah, and I believe today's show is actually very close to your heart, isn't it, Alan?
It really is.
Yeah.
So happy to be here.
Let's get into a little bit about your journey through the world of law. At this point, do you even remember what first sparked your interest?
What first sparked my interest was really what we're doing here today. We're talking about product liability. And I was interested in that even before I went to law school. So this is a labor of love for me to be here today and to be able to talk about product liability.
Tell me a little bit about what you have learned about yourself in your decades as a lawyer.
I learned that I experience situations in life, and that helps me in my work. And one example of that would be I had a riding lawnmower when we had an acre and a half of grass when I was younger and my kids were very young. And I just needed something to help me cut the grass. And I bought this latest, greatest riding lawnmower, and I read all the directions, and I'm zooming around my backyard. Everything is going well. And my yard kind of sloped into a chain link fence that my neighbor had put there. And I found this riding lawnmower slowly falling toward that chain link fence, my right arm going down, and between the fence and the lawnmower, right around where the blade was, and luckily my buttocks lifted up off of the lawnmower, and the blade stopped. And here I was stuck with my arm right where the blades were on that chain link fence between the lawnmower and the fence, and I still had my arm. And that was because there was a dead man switch on the seat of the lawnmower. And when my body left that lawnmower, it stopped instantly, as fast as it was going. And that is the wonderful thing that I like about product liability, because we as trial lawyers get to enforce product liability. If it weren't for trial lawyers, I don't think I would have been sitting on a seat with a dead man switch. But now companies are able to have consumer safety programs, and they want to bring out safe products, and that's because they were sued in order to do so.
I got chills when you were telling that story. Goosebumps.
Me too.
I think that you must be so compelling in front of a jury. You have to be, they must love you.
People like to hear truth, and stories that are true are resonating with people.
So true. Also rejoining us today is someone whom you first met on our housewarming show of Lawyers in the House, Nikki Motley. Welcome back, Nikki.
Thank you, Veronica. So happy to be here.
Nikki is, you might have guessed from the last name, Motley, the next generation of Montlick stepping up to help clients navigate through tough times in their lives with the help of the law. And Nikki, I just want to let people know that your advocacy for people actually started long before you even thought about going to law school. You were actually stepping into the public eye to help people when you were just a kid.
Well, I grew up watching my dad, who was very passionate about public service. And from a young age, he introduced me to the importance of giving back to the community. And I got to be involved in a lot of Montlick & Associates public service programs, which was something that was really special to me.
Tell me about one that really touched your heart. I saw when we were first getting to know each other, and I was looking at these videos of you about A4K. What's A4K?
Yeah, A4K Club is the Ambassador for Kids Club. It's an anti-bullying program, and they provide a lot of resources for anti-bullying for children and for parents. And they also, I don't know the current status of this, but they did go into schools and they met with students and they met with teachers. It was a great resource to promote anti-bullying and discussion about it in schools and the community.
What is it that calls to you about the field of law? You said that you have watched your dad since you were little kind of in this work, but he didn't push you into it.
No, not at all. I mean, he always had two goals in mind. He wanted to provide A+ gold standard of client service, and then he wanted to give back to the community in a really meaningful way. And I think he's passed down those values to me in my career. So it was never a question for me. I always wanted to go into law. And I also had great role models like Alan and other attorneys at our firm that really inspired me. Yeah,
we won't go into it here, but just so you guys know, there are a lot of family ties at Montlick. Alan has 2 kids who work at the firm, and both of them have been on the show. You know what? My secret goal is to get all of them in here at the same time together, but whatever. we are talking about product liability today. Thanks for being in the house with your girl, Veronica. So product liability, I always like to sort of explain what we're talking about to folks in case we're unfamiliar with it. What is it, Alan?
Well, product liability is a doctrine in law that is really one of my favorite areas of practice. This important doctrine of law holds a manufacturer liable for a defective consumer product. It's a unique area, and it's a unique area in that trial lawyers are able to help enforce these laws, encouraging companies to make safer products. There are various ways the law helps to make us all safer as consumers through product liability law. A manufacturer of a product can be found liable for negligence, and we've talked before on this show about negligence. That is the breach of a duty of due care owed to a consumer that ultimately causes damages. However, a lot of times we think about product liability in terms of something called strict liability. What is that? And it's an interesting concept. In this case, the manufacturer of a defective product causing harm to the user, the end user of that product, can be held liable regardless of their intent to cause harm or knowledge of a defect. So, a manufacturer can actually be held liable for a dangerous product even if it didn't know it was dangerous. And at first that might sound like it's a little bit unfair, but if they do their due diligence and test their products long enough, they will put out safe products, right? So we're talking here about making products safer. And there are different categories of products liability. The defective manufacturing of a product, rendering it unsafe to the user, is the main idea. You can also have the defective design of a product, such as in the case of the famous Ford Pinto, where the placement of a gas tank too close to the rear of the vehicle caused fires and other sorts of tragedies which spawned class actions, which we'll talk about a little bit later. You can also have a problem where there's a failure to provide adequate warnings of the danger of a product or defective instructions concerning how to use that product. So if ultimately the instructions are defective, then so is the product. The instructions can be incomplete. The instructions can be confusing. Instructions, if you're not careful, if you buy something and you don't understand the language that the instructions are in, that's a problem as well.
I love that you were able to sort of lay out all of these different aspects of product liability, because there's so many different ways that we could be hurt by a product. It was designed badly, there was an error in manufacturing, or it was marketed in the wrong way, or there was this lack of clear warning about how you're supposed to use the product. I wonder if it seems that these cases are as common as I think they are, especially considering how I opened up the show with all of these different examples that we've actually seen in real life, by the way. What makes a good case, though, for product liability?
Well, we generally, as personal injury lawyers, look at the end result, and we look at the actual injury of a person and what damage occurred due to the defective design or manufacture of the product.
So how badly I'm hurt.
How badly you're hurt is a key consideration. Yes.
What about, let's say, I had one of my friends use this popular mascara that everyone loves, and it turned her eyebrows, her eyelids with like little red bumps. Like, is that product liability? Does she have a personal injury case? Her eyes were stinging.
Stinging probably doesn't spawn a personal injury case. It's not something that's a large enough injury to sue a manufacturer. Manufacturers are strong financially, and they take a lot of money to fight. So you really have to have an injury that's worth fighting for.
I gotcha. So that's maybe too teeny an injury. All right, let's take a look out and say, give me an example of a small case that would be product liability, and then maybe a really big one. Let's start with a small case.
Small case is one of my favorites. I got a call one time from a person years ago that had talked to a lawyer at another firm, and they had told her that she didn't have an injury that was big enough for a product liability case. And this involved a 5-year-old little girl playing in the kitchen. Her mom was cooking dinner, broiling. The oven was slightly open, and mom was talking on the phone, doing what mothers do in the kitchen, and doing all the things that happen in a kitchen.
Yeah.
You have a 5-year-old daughter. She's behind your dress. She's playing around you. She's following you. And this was a relatively new house with new appliances, and it had a spring-loaded oven door, and that enabled the mother to be cooking and let out the fumes that you have to let out when you're, for example, broiling steaks. And the young girl got her finger caught up in the bottom of the oven, which was made of metal, and it actually amputated her finger up to the first knuckle in her middle ring finger. That was her injury. And that, to me, was very serious. The insurance company alleged that the mom was partially negligent in not supervising the child properly. I thought the whole thing was predictable and foreseeable, and I'll tell you why very shortly.
All right, so we are talking about product liability. We've got a good example of a little case, but it sounds pretty big to me, losing the tip of a finger. What happened with that case, and what happens when there is a product problem that everybody knows about? I'll explain. That's coming up on Lawyers in the House. Stay with us. Welcome back to Lawyers in the House with Montlick as we take a look at product liability and what happens when something we buy or use is actually what hurts us. We're talking to Alan Saltzman and Nikki Montlick from Montlick Injury Attorneys. And when we left off, Alan was going to tell us how he helped this little girl who lost part of a finger on a spring-loaded oven door.
Well, Veronica, it was pretty easy for me. In a prior episode of this show, I talked about actually seeing somebody shut a minivan door on a lady's hand, and it looked like she was going to lose that hand. She didn't. The door came open, and it was engineered into the car. And I saw that, and when I had this case, you learn from the cases that you have and the things that you have seen. It occurred to me that a little bit of rubber and engineering would have solved this problem as well, Veronica. So the insurance company was saying the mother was negligent. I didn't see it that way. I thought that it should be engineered so it was so foreseeable that somebody might be in the kitchen, especially a 5-year-old little girl, and might get her finger caught up in there. So why should it be made of metal? So I went right past the insurance company and to the CEO of the company, and we were able to resolve that case, and everything turned out as well as it could have. However, it was a regrettable injury, but most lawyers probably wouldn't see that as a valuable product liability case.
Yeah, and tell the truth, I'm sure somebody turned that case down before it got to you.
That's what I heard.
Yeah. I think so maybe that's a design defect, right, that you were talking about.
That's a perfect example of a manufacturing defect in the area of design.
Yeah. Okay, so is this the kind of thing where we would see like a recall? Nikki, talk to me about recalls and the importance of those. How do those come into play?
Yeah, so that's a great example of a circumstance where it would warrant bringing a product liability lawsuit. But there's various defective products where a recall is more appropriate. Most recently, there's been major recalls of dry shampoos, of different hair care products, and it's been talked about recently in the world of cosmetics. But essentially, a recall can happen when there's a safety issue or a defect with a product. A recall can be issued if there's an issue with a warning label or if it's improperly warns consumers or fails to warn consumers.
These are the cases that everybody knows about because we often hear them in the news. I mean, maybe not a week goes by that I don't have a story about a recall.
Yeah, and these have been trending on social media a lot, at least that I've seen. But when a recall is issued, stores are supposed to pull the product off the shelf. So the best thing that you can do if you hear that a product that you have is recalled is to stop using it. That's the safest thing to do. You can also go to the website, and the manufacturer is supposed to issue instructions. But the best thing to do is when you hear that, stop using it, and you can also take the product back to the store and get a refund.
Yeah, still to come on Lawyers in the House. We're talking about product liability and why for sale doesn't always mean it's safe. How can you tell? We're talking with Nikki Mottlick and Alan Saltzman here on Lawyers in the House. I'm Veronica Waters. Stay with us. Hey, folks. So glad you are back with us. Thanks for hanging in there with this episode of Lawyers in the House. I'm your host, Veronica Waters, here with Nikki Mottlick and Alan Saltzman from Mottlick Injury Attorneys. We're talking about product liability today, but if you like what you hear, we've got a whole lot more in the vault for you. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. You can also subscribe to Mottlick on YouTube so you can see our smiling faces, and you won't miss an episode. You'll get a notification every single time it drops. And you know what? Don't forget to follow us on social, too. We're on every platform at Mottlick Law. We hope to see you there. When I was telling people that we were going to talk about product liability on the show, I asked people what came to mind, and they thought of warnings, Alan. Mm-hmm. So I wrote a disclaimer for today's show. Warning, this episode of Lawyers in the House will expose you to critically helpful information when it comes to keeping you and your family safe. If you listen to this program, we cannot guarantee that you will not walk away with a boatload of facts. If you are allergic to great lawyers or fun hosts, please do not listen to or view Lawyers in the House. Thanks for being with us. Okay, so seriously, how can we keep ourselves and our families safe when the stuff that we're buying and bringing into the house is the danger?
So, Veronica, I love your disclaimer, first of all, but there's a few ingredients that when you are reading an ingredient label to look out for. And so practicing something that we like to call label literacy is super important. So the first thing to know is that when you're reading the ingredients, the first ingredient listed has the highest quantity and the last one comparably the least quantity in the product. Mm-hmm. So there's two ingredients that I personally look out for and I try to avoid at all costs. The first one is benzene. Benzene is a human carcinogen. It's been deemed that by the FDA, and it's been linked to blood cancers, leukemia, lymphoma, and so that's one to avoid. It's known probably most widely for being in sunscreens.
It's also in car fumes, exhaust, and natural gas.
It's in glue. It's in paint strippers. So it's pretty unsettling to think an ingredient that's in various personal care products is also a main ingredient in paint strippers.
Yikes.
So benzene is one to try to avoid. And then another one is fragrance. Fragrance is a general term. It can encompass over 100 different ingredients. So basically...
Wait, what?
Yeah. So if you see fragrance listed on your product, you actually have no idea what's actually in it.
Oh, that's a good point, because sometimes you'll see that this product was made with, milk, right? Or butter. And then it'll say like 2% milk and whatever else goes into the butter. But on a tube of something that says it's got fragrance added, there's no little parenthesis after fragrance that says the many ingredients that go into that. That is correct. There could be benzene in the fragrance. Maybe not, but you know what I'm saying? It is scary to think about what the labels actually don't tell us.
It is, yeah. Well, a common thing that's been found in fragrances is phthalates. And phthalates is a chemical usually put in products to help the scent last longer. But there's various health risks associated with it that manufacturers don't tell you about, which includes cancer, endocrine disruption, which is imbalance of the hormones, which is really problematic, especially for women, birth defects, and reproductive and developmental toxicity. So it's not something to mess around with. So generally avoiding products that have fragrances, and it can also be listed as perfume on an ingredient label.
You know, I've sometimes taken to the internet to try to find sites that'll help me understand the ingredients that are in things. And some of them are kind of confusing. I've looked for apps online, you know, or in the Apple Store that can help me. I think there's one called Think Dirty I've used. There's like a whole list of them. I try to find information, but sometimes, to your point about label literacy, it can be a little difficult. So I try to shop for what I consider clean products. The FDA, you would think, would sort of regulate everything, but apparently that's not the case, you guys.
You would think so. The reality is the FDA, they can't and they don't regulate every single product. And the differences with the U.S. versus the EU and some other countries is that we practice more of a sell first, regulate later. So products are put on the market, and then if there's an issue with them, the FDA will issue a recall, and manufacturers can actually choose whether or not they want to register their product with the FDA and get FDA approval.
Wow, that is crazy. That is crazy. Just because it's on the shelf does not mean it is safe. I'm curious to know, though, whether or not there is this built-in expectation of safety, right? If I'm buying it, if I'm buying my dry shampoo, if I'm buying this perfume, this cosmetic, this car, whatever it is, I'm thinking that it is safe. My lawnmower, my oven, it wouldn't make it to market if it wasn't.
Well, that's what product liability is all about. And we just talked about strict liability, meaning that a product could be defective and the manufacturer might not actually know that the product was defective when they built the product. If you buy something as is, then you buy it as is. And it doesn't matter what the salesperson tells you. If you sign something and you buy something that is as is, like a used car, that's what you get. And there is no warranty that comes with that. And Nikki, you have to bring your glasses to the store because they make these warnings so small, I don't know how people can even read them. It's very difficult, and it's important to know when you're reading something that the ingredients that are mentioned first are the ingredients that are mostly in the product.
Yeah.
As they descend in order, those ingredients are least in the product.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's so interesting, you know, and sometimes the product gets on the market and they do find out later. I remember a long time ago something about hip replacements, and people were getting something and it would like degrade in the body, and they didn't know it apparently at first, and that turned into a huge thing. Okay, quickly, can I? This is not like all about the girls. Okay, we all use personal care products. Everyone washes, we moisturize. You know, we use deodorant. What about this dry shampoo thing? I have dry shampoo at home.
I do as well. There was a recent recall in December 2022 where the FDA recalled 19 dry shampoos from name brands because they had elevated levels of benzene. This included brands like Dove, Tresemme. An independent lab actually found that it had elevated levels of benzene in 70% of the dry shampoos that they tested. So that's pretty concerning. The reality is that even companies with a lot of name recognition, for example, like Johnson & Johnson, have had thousands of products liability lawsuits brought against them and various recalls over the years. So you really have to be your own advocate and do your research when it comes to products, even if it's a brand that you've seen frequently.
Yeah, Johnson & Johnson has been under fire. I remember covering a part of a trial over the talcum powder that they sold that was in downtown Atlanta. So again, Alan, some of this stuff seems to me like I should assume that it's safe. It's kind of scary to know I could be sitting behind the wheel of something, for example, that is more of a danger than I think it is, other than just being like this guided missile I have on the internet, on the interstate.
Well, Veronica, not everything out there is dangerous. Today, people are driving cars that are safer, and safer because we have areas like product liability and trial lawyers to enforce the laws to make sure that companies have incentives to go ahead and make safer products. But you shouldn't assume that everything out there is unsafe. It just isn't. Read the warnings that come with your product. Read the manuals. Learn how to use the product, and use the product the way that it was supposed to be used.
Buyer beware. All right, Alan, in the first part of the show, we talked about big versus little cases. Give me an example of a big case.
Well, big cases don't often present themselves in terms of big when you think monetarily, but you know they're big right off the bat because they're bad injuries. And one that comes to mind, and they're all dear to my heart, but one that I think about a lot is we had a very bad car accident involving teenagers, a full car. It was a small car made overseas, and there were 4 passengers in the car, and there were 3 passengers in the back seat. And the middle seat of a car is usually a safe seat. But in our case, what happened was, Veronica, is the middle seat passenger, our client, had the worst injuries, much worse than her girlfriend to the left or her girlfriend to the right. And the only insurance available to pay for the accident was $25,000 per person, $50,000 for the accident. Our client had severe spinal injuries, spinal fractures, and she could not feel anything from the chest down. It was a very serious case with very little insurance, Veronica, and we talked about uninsured motorists on this show many times in the past. People need uninsured motorists, but that's another subject. We looked at this and we said to ourselves, why did this young lady in the middle back seat get injured so much worse than her friend to the right and her friend to the left? And the reason was because her friend to the right and her friend to the left had a shoulder harness along with a lap belt.
Yes.
And Veronica,
those middle seats in the back don't have those harnesses.
They don't all, and they're making them now, and we're seeing more and more shoulder harnesses in the middle. So we figured this out. We have a policy at our firm to brainstorm about every serious case. Even though there's very little insurance, we look at serious cases and we say, what could this be? Could this be a product liability case? In this case, it was, and we filed suit against the manufacturer, the overseas manufacturer of that small car. It took years and years. It was very expensive, but at the end of the day, they were going to put the shoulder harness in the very next model year. What can that cost? $35, Veronica?
Wow. So they kind of knew that there was something that they could improve on their product already.
We believe they rolled the dice, and we believe that our lawsuit resulted in them putting that shoulder harness in that middle seat the very next model year.
I have heard stories, obviously no names here, but I've seen that there is this possible trend of people who sort of, as you say, roll the dice, or they're calculating the cost of fixing whatever the product is, changing it, or just putting it into the market. And maybe if somebody gets injured, they are willing to take the risk of taking it as an individual case rather than the huge expense of fixing it up front. Kind of scary.
It can be scary, and I don't know that it's intentional. We are dealing with huge businesses, and there are thousands and thousands of components into every single car, and they have to get it out. They have to price it right, and certain things don't make it into certain models, but unfortunately they should. And over the years, manufacturers have, by and large, learned this lesson because lawyers who enforce product liability law help them to be honest and help them to make safer products.
I feel like what we're learning is that lawyers are like the cops of the consumer world.
In this case, we are. That's exactly what
it.
product liability is all about.
You know what? You are the law and the order. All right. Thank you so much, Alan Saltzman and Nikki Montlick. We have been talking about product liability, and coming up next, what you've been waiting for all hour long, the Montlick closing argument. Don't miss it. Thank Thank you so much for hanging with us here in the house on Lawyers in the House with Montlick. I'm your host, Veronica Waters, here with Nikki Montlick and Alan Saltzman. And we are ready to bring to you what you've been wanting all hour long, the Montlick closing argument. We're talking about product liability. Nikki and Alan, the floor is yours.
So it's very important to stay up to date on recalls and product safety news. You can do that by when you buy a product, like, for example, a car seat. Often it comes with a warranty card where you can go online, or there may be a phone number, and you can register the warranty card, and that'll keep you up to date with any product recalls. You also can visit the U.S. Product Consumer Safety Commission website, and they also post any recalls and will keep you up to date. But it's important to read the labels of your product and do your research and look out for the keywords that we mentioned. Try to avoid products with benzene, with fragrance, with phthalates. If you can have a product that's not an aerosol, that's typically better. But there's also apps and websites that can help you when you're in the store and you're shopping. I personally like to use the EWG Beauty app. It has a function where you can scan the barcode, or you can type into their database. They have over 8,000 products registered, and it'll give you an analysis of any ingredients that are harmful. It gives you basically a 1 to 10 scale, 10 being the most toxic and 1 being the best. And it'll rank the product for you. So that's really helpful to see when you're considering.
I love that. Now, Alan, you mentioned something about how expensive cases like this can be, but you're not saying that I have to take on this expense myself.
Absolutely not. When you're injured, you need a firm with the experience and with the resources to be able to pay the expenses to prosecute your case. And that's what we do. We wish for you that you never have an accident where you need a lawyer. But if you do, we handle cases, Veronica, everywhere. People can call us at 1-800-LAW-NEED, and we're here to help them, big case or little case. And my one thought that I want to get across to everyone is that you need a lawyer who's going to recognize the kind of a case that you have. I always worry about situations where lawyers take cases like the one we discussed prior, where we sued the automobile manufacturer, and they just see that $50,000 worth of insurance that's available, and they don't see the product case. You need to talk to a lawyer who is trained in product liability and all sorts of areas of the law to make sure that you don't miss a case that you actually have.
You know, it's so good that you mentioned that, too, because even though we're in the studios in Atlanta, Georgia, you are handling cases all over the country, which is important because these products are sold everywhere. Don't forget that you can sign up for safety and legal tips from Montlick.com. Go to the website. You can get a lot more information about product liability there. Thank you so much to Nikki Montlick and Alan Saltzman. I'm your host, Veronica Waters. This is Lawyers in the House. We will see you next time.